contention over new tax proposals that Kenyans say are punitive.
Kenyans to voice their concerns about the Finance Bill 2024-2025.
Since June 18th, Kenya has seen widespread demonstrations, mainly led by the Generation Z against the Finance Bill 2024, which was perceived to impose harsh taxes on an already struggling populace.
Tax policy measures proposed in the Finance Bill 2024.
This bill, now abandoned, was presented as a solution to the country's public debt, which stands at 10.6 trillion shillings.
When we formulated the bill, it had 346 billion of new revenue.
However, Kenya's debt issues date back much further, part of it coinciding with the birth of many of today's protesters. Around that time, a major corruption scandal was unfolding.
No, all corruption scandals must be kept alive. Anglo Leasing has taken 20 years. Goldenberg has been with us for more than 32 years. It doesn't mean that we stop talking about them because we need to keep them alive until we get justice.
Public debt and corruption are deeply intertwined in Kenya's history, often making for considerable highlights in presidential campaigns. While borrowing is not inherently detrimental, imprudent borrowing and corruption have long drained Kenya's resources, hindering sustainable growth.
So say you get a debt, you get money, you take out a loan, and you are going to buy a house for yourself. But instead of using the loan to buy your house, you go and gamble with it.
One notable example is the Anglo Leasing scandal, a decades-old but undying case that has come to be used as a case study of state capture.
The beauty of time, especially when it comes to the Anglo Leasing saga, is that it gives room for perspective.
This is 2015.
The name Kamani has for over a decade been synonymous with the multi-billion shillings Anglo Leasing scandal, and for the Kamani brothers Deepak and Rashmi, together with their father Chaman Lal.
This is 2024.
After more than a decade of probe and court cases, suspects in the multi-billion Anglo Leasing scandal have been acquitted.
Over 2 decades after the lid was blown off one of Kenya's most infamous scandals,
the executives attempt to push the National Assembly to approve a 1.4 billion shilling payment to Anglo Leasing companies has stalled.
life has not fully ebbed out of the scandal that transcended the Moi regime, stealing its way into the Kibaki regime.
Deepak Kamani was arraigned in court with 2 of his relatives to face various charges related to the multi-billion shilling scam.
In January this year, the Kamanis, a family implicated in the scandal, were acquitted alongside 3 others, seemingly blowing into oblivion the remaining wisps of life in the ghosts of the scandal. But first, let us get a context of what the Anglo Leasing scandal was.
He lifted the lid to the infamous decade-long Anglo Leasing scam.
I only knew of the passport printing, only to come and discover that the thing was worth $230 million.
Tabling an investigative report on the shady dealings on printing of passports at the then Ministry of Home Affairs.
The intrigues of 18 alleged irregular contracts, some allegedly awarded to phantom companies, were unveiled in 2005 by then Governance and Ethics Permanent Secretary John Githongo.
2006 was the year stories about corruption in Kenya dominated the news. John Githongo released more damaging information about the Anglo Leasing scandal that had forced President Mwai Kibaki to relieve former Minister for Transport Chris Murungaru of his job the previous year. Githongo's revelations would force Finance Minister David Muraria to resign.
In his report to then President Mwai Kibaki, he referred to some of the companies awarded these contracts as non-existent. Between 1997 and 2004, the government of Kenya signed at least 18 contracts amounting to over 56.3 billion shillings at the time. The contracts were for the supply of security equipment and services at various police departments, communication and satellite equipment, an oceanographic survey vessel, and passport printing equipment in what came to be famously known as the Anglo Leasing type contracts. The Anglo Leasing case was not without its challenges, given that it spanned two administrations and multiple countries, as Sheila Masinde, the head of programs at Transparency International, explains.
This case was also quite interesting because it involved or occurred between two regimes. It started in the Moi era, where initial payments were made, I think about 900 million. And then when the Kibaki team took over, the respective ministers, and this particular scandal cut across several ministries. But the fact that it cut across two regimes just tells you that corruption knows no political divide.
Chief Magistrate Felix Kombo on 19th January ruled that the prosecution's evidence failed to prove that the Kamanis were beneficial owners of either Soundday or Apex Corporation, two companies they are linked to that were implicated in the scandal. Moreover, Chief Magistrate Kombo noted that the prosecution was susceptible to allegations of selective and malicious prosecution, since some of the people involved in the scandal were never charged, and that the payments made to Soundday by the government were legal.
As already seen, the SCA was validated by opinion of the Attorney General and cannot by any stretch be described as a purported contract. It was a binding contract between the GOK and Soundday.
A dossier by John Githongo detailing the scandal implicated among others businessman Jimmy Wanjigi, Anura Pereira, the Kamanis, and the late President Mwai Kibaki said Alfred Gitonga. True to Magistrate Kombo's ruling, some of those implicated were never charged. Although Deepak Kamani and Rashmi Kamani were acquitted, together with their father Chamanlal Kamani posthumously, over what the magistrate termed inexplicable cherry-picking and the lack of evidence linking them as beneficial owners to Soundday Corporation and Apex Finance, documents in opposition may show this missing link. A letter dated 15th June 2012, written by the director of the Financial Investigation Agency in the British Virgin Islands to a law firm Alcogal, requests for information on the beneficial owners of Anglo Leasing Finance Limited and Apex Finance International Corporation. At the time, Aleman Cordero Galindo and Lee, Alcogal, was the law firm representing Apex as its registered agent, before it resigned this representation in October 2010. Apex Finance was financing Soundday in the execution of 3 of the 5 contracts it was awarded. Both companies were enjoined with the accused in the case against the Kamanis. In response to the Financial Investigation Agency director's letter, Alcogal's money laundering reporting officer responded with a letter listing Deepak and Rashmi Kamani as the beneficial owners of Apex Finance and Anglo Leasing and Finance International Limited. A corporate directory search conducted by Alcogal showed that Deepak, Rashmi and Chamanlal Kamani were directors at Apex Finance from January 8, 1998 to October 25, 2001, when they all ceased to be directors. Leaked correspondence between investigators and the registered agents of Apex Finance suggests that the Kamanis were at one point directors of Apex Finance and were, at least in 2012, the beneficial owners of Apex.
It is not clear where some of these monies ended up because most of these companies that were named or that were given these contracts, is it 18 or about 18 contracts or so, were actually fictitious company. They were ghost companies, briefcase companies, yeah, and some, of course, going to other shadowy companies and individuals, and that is why that money has never come back to Kenya. And it is a lesson in terms of beneficial ownership transparency, which is a practice that we are now pushing for in Kenya.
Another name behind some of the companies implicated in the Anglo Leasing scandal was Anura Perera.
Anura Perera, a Sri Lankan who is said to have come to Kenya in the 80s, controlled the other 5 contracts worth 13 billion shillings.
And while the Kamanis were prosecuted and later acquitted in a court case that lasted nearly a decade, Perera was never prosecuted. According to the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission's Deputy Chief Executive Officer, Abdi Mohamud, it was only prudent at the time to go for the big fish.
These were 18 contracts. What the EACC initially investigated was 6 contracts. And out of the 6, 4 were presented in court. Of course, what happens is when you have huge investigations that involve, many companies, some of them based outside, you wouldn't have the capacity to investigate all of them at a time.
The Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission, now Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, at the time listed Perera top among persons under investigation, terming him the organizer of the corruption scheme. Leaked classified US Embassy cable described Perera as the mastermind of the Anglo Leasing scheme. In yet another cable, his visa privileges had been permanently revoked under US Proclamation 7750, which restricts entry of persons, including those associated with corruption, into the US. So, just who is Anura Leslie Perera and how was he involved in the Anglo Leasing scandal? According to US intelligence in 2006, it was unclear what kind of passport Perera carried or what nationality was traveling under. The US Embassy cable states that Perera is very difficult to trace and has proven a formidable adversary for law enforcement personnel. OCCRP and Africa Uncensored investigations may have uncovered more information on 6 of the companies linked to Anura Perera that were directly connected to the Anglo Leasing scandal. Euromarine Industries Incorporated, Empresa do Financas International Limited, Navigia Capital Corporation, First Mercantile Securities Corporation, Universal Space, and Sierra Systems Incorporated. 5 of these companies were set up in the British Virgin Islands, a secrecy jurisdiction or tax havens, are places with laws that provide financial secrecy enabling non-residents to hide assets and avoid taxes. However, at the time of signing of the contracts, the addresses of these companies, aside from Universal Space, were indicated in countries other than where they were incorporated. The companies were incorporated in the BVI by design. Atia Waris, Professor of Fiscal Law and Policy at the University of Nairobi and a UN independent expert on foreign debt, explains how illicit financial flows in secrecy jurisdictions may affect economies.
The effect of a secrecy jurisdiction or a tax haven, depending on what phrase you use, is that as long as they exist and as long as they allow the receipt of money without question into their economies, first you lose the economy, the value of movement of currency and circulation of money in that economy. And now it's moving into this other economy. So the other economy is going to get stronger and this one's going to get weaker because the money is not disappearing, right? It's moving jurisdiction, as it were. The problem is that if countries accept money that have come from corrupt means, they benefit from it and then they don't question it. And there have been many incidents where, for example, countries have said, oh, leader X released money, we knew it's not possible, so we've frozen the money.
Besides using secrecy jurisdictions to hide the nature of his companies, Perera masked this connection to these companies by having them registered as shareholders in each other and transferring their directorships using bearer shares, a form of secretive ownership in which whoever has possession of the paper document owns the shares in the company. This type of ownership was so controversial that it was banned in Switzerland in 2019.
Bearer shares are very interesting. There are a couple of countries in the world that still have bearer shares. I'm not sure why they developed the way in which they developed, but they developed in this sense. I own a business and then I pass away or I want to sell my company and make it super easy. I have a bearer share which basically identifies the business and then I just hand it over and keep walking, right? And you pay me for it. They developed so long ago and they've existed for so long, but you also don't know where they've moved, how they've transferred, if they're still in one country or another. And it's one thing to know, I'm a barber and you're a barber and I hand over my bearer share to you. The problem becomes when I create a company, say, to give a certain service, like I'm going to be a consultant and I have a bearer share on it, and then I hand it over to a consultant in another country. There isn't a track and trace system to say, a person from this country now holds that bearer share, as opposed to where the share is registered and sort of brought into creation, as it were.
Pereira intricately concealed his connection to the 6 companies, effectively removing his and his wife's name from the paperwork just as the Anglo Leasing scandal was taking shape. Let us take a closer look at the 6 companies and Pereira's link to them. Euromarine was the company contracted in a contract dated July 2003 to supply an oceanographic survey vessel to the Ministry of Defense. This project was to be jointly funded by Euromarine Industries, Empresa do Financas, and Navigia Capital International Limited. Empresa and Navigia both had the Pereiras on their paperwork as directors between 2002 to 2004 and 2003 to 2004, respectively, after which both companies put nominee directors until 2009.
Euromarine Industries, which was contracted by the government to provide security naval vessels, now becomes the latest company to obtain High Court orders barring the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission from investigating it.
The Commission is barred from seeking or giving mutual legal assistance, and thus its investigations, particularly those with international dimensions, are wholly paralyzed.
The companies were then consolidated and made subsidiaries of Euromarine. In 2009, after the 3 companies won a petition to bar the Kenyan government from investigating them, Pereira appeared as the ultimate shareholder of all 3 companies. Universal Searchspace was incorporated in Delaware, USA, and was contracted to deliver broadband equipment and internet services to the Kenya Postal Service, only 2 months after its incorporation. The company was awarded $28.1 million for the project. In July 2006, after the Anglo Leasing scandal had blown up, Universal Searchspace sued the Kenyan government in London for non-payment of the contract and won. The Kenyan government was forced to settle, paying the company 705 million shillings in 2014 in order to secure a Eurobond loan.
We are faced with a challenge that myself and the majority of Kenyans believe we should not be paying. The courts have deemed that we must pay. We have gone to the highest level, including appealing it, and we have been told again we must pay.
Pereira's connection to Universal Searchspace was revealed in 2015 when he signed for its dissolution. Just like Navigia, Euromarine and Empresa, First Mercantile Security Corporation was also incorporated using bearer shares. The company was listed as the funder for SpaceNet Corporation in the provision of broadband communication equipment and was awarded about $11.8 million. The director of First Mercantile was initially A&G Trading, a company that was also incorporated using bearer shares, but had Anura and his wife Gazala registered as directors in 2002. The company also seems to bear their initials, A and G. In 2002, a person by the name Christos Koumbis was appointed director. He also appears as a nominee director of Empresa do Financas International. In 2007, Anura Pereira became the sole shareholder of the company, but was replaced by a namesake company, First Mercantile Securities Incorporated, in 2010. He, however, repossessed the shares in 2017. A register of directors signed by Anura lists him as the sole director of First Mercantile Securities. The company also sued the Kenyan government for a terminated contract and was paid 722 million shillings.
Wanataka kutulazimisha tulipe hiyo pesa, na tumesema kama tutalipa hiyo pesa lazima wananchi wa Kenya wajue ni mambo gani inaendelea, na ndio sababu tumepeleka mambo haya bunge.
Mr. Thuge is just being smart.
1.4 billion shillings paid in a single transaction for two companies, Universal Satspace and First Mercantile Securities Corporation, both said to belong to Anura Pereira.
The directive was for immediate payment. The payment was made, the value date on Monday, and it was made to the beneficiary bank. It was NatWest Bank, and the amounts were made to the account name was Travers Smith.
Another company associated with Pereira, Sierra Systems, was awarded $41.8 million in the Anglo Leasing type contracts.
As if 1.4 billion shillings is not enough, the government is staring at clearing public coffers of 3.5 billion shillings more on Anglo Leasing type contracts.
The contract was for the supply of security equipment at the National Intelligence Service and was denoted as Project Flagstaff. The company was incorporated only 3 months before it was awarded this contract. Pereira's connection to Sierra Systems only became apparent in 2010 when he exercised the power of attorney to open a Dubai bank account for the company through another BVI entity, Pan Pacific Trustees Limited. An analysis of the corporate records showed that Pereira actively obscured his connections to these companies as the investigations unfolded. He only put his name on the companies in 2007 to 2009 after investigations by Kenyan, UK and Swiss authorities wound down. Additionally, our investigations revealed that these connections form a complex network linking at least 60 companies, 20 people, 5 trusts and 1 organization, all appearing to lead back to Anura Pereira.
If you have 60 companies with 1 or 2 people working in each of them, but they're just pushing paper, then why are they really there? Because if there's no economic activity taking place, they shouldn't be there. But the way the world is structured with these, I think there are about 90 plus secrecy jurisdictions in the world, is that you can now strategize this sort of web of companies so that you're paying less in some and so you're balancing it out. So no, the numbers is not the problem. It is if they're actually doing a task. And unfortunately, there are a lot of accusations of companies having what are called post-box companies, right? So literally the only thing you have in a country is a PO box, and the mail goes into the PO box, and once a week or once a month somebody comes and empties the mail and then forwards it to the next country.
This intricate web of paper-pushing entities raises significant questions about the legitimacy of their activities. In 2006, 4 shell companies and 2 trusts were set up in the Cook Islands, while a foundation was set up in Panama, all with the links to the Pereira family. In 2009, $2.5 million was moved from the Cook Island companies to one of the Pereira-linked trusts, Regency Trust. In a letter to the Regency Trust signed by Ghazala Pereira, Pereira's wife, she instructs the trust to borrow $1 million from the Churchill Trust and advance the same amount to her as a loan. Another $1 million was advanced to Pereira's wife towards the completion of a private equity investment in a hotel in Ukraine. This was not the only such request for funds from Ghazala. Between 2011 and 2013, more than $11 million was moved between the Pereira-linked Regency and Churchill Trusts and the Cook Island company set up in 2006. More than $9 million of these appear to have been paid to Pereira's wife and son. Leaked documents show a complex series of transactions with a revolving cast of actors that will emerge, wait for their turn to act, and then fade into the background. One such actor is corporate trustee Wagner International Limited, established in New Zealand at the end of 2015 to act for Regency Trust. Regency Trust had been created in 2006 by Anura Pereira and also registered in New Zealand. In 2009, Regency accepted loans from Newford, Rockford, Stafford, and Trafford, companies solely owned by the Churchill Trust, another trust operated on behalf of Pereira, registered in the Cook Islands, where bank secrecy is the norm. Regency Trust also advanced a loan of $2.4 million to Anura's wife, Ghazala Pereira. Rockford, Stafford, and Trafford were dissolved in September 2013. In March 2017, Wagner cancelled all the loans that the companies had lent it before they were wound up, and the last character in this intriguing set of events, Newford, closed in April 2017. These intricate financial maneuvers resembled a high-stakes poker game where funds were shuffled between accounts with the finesse of a seasoned player. It was as if money was borrowed from one pocket, only to be slipped into the other, with debts curiously disappearing in the process. The incorporation of some Pereira-linked companies in secrecy jurisdictions not only provided a secure veil for the seemingly questionable transactions, but also the possibility of tax avoidance. One may wonder why then such structures continue to exist. According to Atia Waris, more robust regulation may help in the control of illicit financial flows.
There is a global push to stop them from existing and to try and regulate them. But the reason that they exist is because every country in the world is sovereign and have a right to develop their own laws and regulations. Not only that, tax collection is considered to be a domestic issue. So there's no cross-border enforcement of tax liabilities. There are so many elements of finance that are moving around unregulated right now, including private debt also. Public debt is partially regulated, but private debt is not. And we need a place where people can go and say, hey, this is happening, and how do we resolve it in a fair and equitable manner? That space does not exist in the world right now. So there is no consensus on how to take it forward.
The Anglo Leasing scandal shook Kenya's economy to its core, with aftershocks still reverberating decades later. The fact that many of those implicated, whether never charged or acquitted, remain tight-lipped about this festering wound speaks volumes of how deeply its roots ran.
The majority of high-level corruption-related prosecutions, unfortunately, do not succeed.
However, the scheme was not without its lessons. Both EACC's Abdi Mohamud and Transparency International's Sheila Masinde agree on one thing: crimes never expire.
These crimes do not expire. We have learned a lot from the cases that we have presented in court so far, and we intend to use the lessons learned to also file new matters in court.
Hi, my name is Calvin Rock, a reporter and fact checker at Africa Uncensored. Thank you for watching this video to this point. You are our #1 supporter and we value you. To maintain our independence and be able to bring you balanced and in-depth pieces, we are asking for your financial support. Become a member on our channel or support us through Patreon. The link is right on your screen or in the video description below. Or you can send us M-Pesa directly through the instructions on your screen or below. Cheers.